Today's episode of This Week in Startups is brought to you by Walker Corporate Law, a boutique law firm specializing in the representation of entrepreneurs. Visit them at walkercorporatelaw.com. And by Wistia. Take control of your video marketing with powerful tools and analytics built specifically for business. Go to wistia.com/twist to get your free Wistia account today. And by Amazon Web Services. Get the resources you need to easily get started with AWS Activate, a new global program for startups, including AWS credits, training, developer support, a startup community forum, and special offers from third parties. Learn more and sign up at aws.amazon.com/activate.
Hey everybody, it's Jason Calacanis, and this is This Week in Startups, the show where we talk about investing in, creating, and just generally building startup companies. And boy, do we have a great guest today. Stewart Alsop is with us. Stewart has been a mentor to me in the business and has been doing venture for 20 years and has been in the industry for even longer. He knows where all the bodies are buried, and we're going to find out today where they are. Stick with us. It's going to be an amazing episode.
That's what it's all about, man. They said money is the root of all evil. What? Funny how it feeds my people. Yeah. We ain't gonna live like equals until we get the money, spend the money, and defeat you. Yeah. Money is the root of all evil. What? Funny how it feeds my people. Yeah. We ain't gonna live like equals until we get the money, spend the money, and defeat you.
Hey everybody, we're here at This Week in Startups at WeWork Golden Gate in San Francisco's Central Market neighborhood. Thanks to my friends at WeWork for building me this awesome studio. You guys are the best, and it's a great place to work out. If I work out of here 2 days a week here at WeWork, and the desks are super affordable. Like, I don't know if it's $500 or $600 a desk. So if you're starting your company, go ahead and check out WeWork.com. They're in New York, San Francisco, and in LA. The Launch Festival is coming up in San Francisco here, February 24th, 25th, and 26th. Obviously the best place to launch a new company. Our alumni speak for themselves: Dropbox, Mint, Yammer, Fitbit, Room 77, Swipe. God, everybody's launched there, and it's been great. And you can go to festival.launch.co and sign up. Stewart Alsop has been in the industry much longer than I have.
Before you were born, actually.
Before I was born in 1970, so I don't know.
Okay.
But that's a good starting point. I mean, when were you first exposed to the technology industry?
So I was executive editor of a magazine called Inc. magazine, not with a K, in 1979, 1980. And, personal computer business started to happen. So we featured Steve Jobs on the cover. We put Dan Bricklin and Bob Frankston from... People don't even remember VisiCalc.
Dan Bricklin created VisiCalc?
VisiCalc, the very first spreadsheet.
Which was the first one I ever used.
Yeah, I know.
I was 9 years old,
yeah.
10 years old.
Okay, so
literally on a CPM.
That's the contemporary time.
It was on a TRS-R 80, I think.
It started on an Apple II, and that was where
Apple II,
that was the tail that wagged the Apple dog.
Is it really?
People started buying Apple IIs in order to get VisiCalc because it wasn't available on CPM.
So VisiCalc, for people who don't know, would be what Excel was. We're like before Lotus 1, 2, 3.
It was 1, 2, 3, and what 1, 2, 3
the first spreadsheet.
The very first spreadsheet.
What were those times like when people didn't have computers in their homes, had never touched a computer? What was their reaction when they actually saw a computer and used it?
Yeah. Well, you didn't see one and use it. We've got all these devices that we play with, and it's like in our pockets and all over.
Yeah.
The first computer I got was an Apple II. I had to go buy it. You had to go buy a monitor separately. Apple didn't sell it. And I put it out on my dining room table and tried to make it work. It was not an easy thing to do. When I first started looking at computers, I was looking at it from the point of view of the reader of Inc. magazine, and I knew about as much as they did. So I'd ask people, so what's the difference between hardware and software? And they'd start giving me these answers like, well, it depends. You got some hardware and then you got software, you got like operating systems, and I'd sit there and I'd go, God, I don't understand any of this stuff.
Right, they haven't even defined those basic terms or concepts yet.
Well, even now, and people are still a little confused about it, because you have all those distinctions. I mean, you have operating systems. And what's the difference between an embedded operating system and a real-time operating system and all that kind of stuff.
And so you met Steve Jobs to put him on the cover back then?
And got yelled at him. The very first time I got yelled at him was because I mentioned his net worth in the article.
You did?
And it turns out actually, was it Isaacson in his biography gave me credit for being the first one to write a business article about Apple.
Really? So tell me that first moment when you shake hands with Steve Jobs.
Well, he didn't, have the reputation he
Yeah.
developed later.
Right. He was a normal guy.
1981. I mean,
Yeah.
they started in 1976 or 77. So the company's like 4 or 5 years old. They're beginning to sell computers. But the reason I met him was because, there's this fellow, Jonathan Rotenberg, who when I met him was 17 and had started something called the Boston Computer Society. And unlike, more recently where the Macworld show was where Steve would show up and do product demos, he started doing them at the Boston Computer Society.
Really?
It was Jonathan and he kind of connected to each other, and Jonathan would give him this stage to stand on to introduce products.
And how many people would be there? And it would be in Boston?
In Boston. And,
Where? What location?
Let's see. It's like Heinz Auditorium. I think they've renamed it since. I'm
So
not
it was
sure.
like
This is 30-some-odd years ago. So
Yeah,
it's
so it's an auditorium somewhere.
auditorium. He's on a stage.
Stu, it's
and
40
it's
years ago, just so you know.
I'm trying to avoid that.
Exactly.
Is it really? No, 1980 to 2010 is 30 years, right?
Oh, it is. 34.
Okay, so a
We're
little
getting
more than-
closer to 40, though. You said 79, so I felt like it's more like
cross-
35. All right.
Look, man, I just
But so
celebrated a
there's some-
birthday, and I
there's-
know how old I am. So.
There's some auditorium in Boston.
Yeah,
How many
there
people
were
in
a
the
bunch
audience?
of them. We'd move around, but
How many people in the audience? For
just
someone?
a couple of thousand.
Couple thousand
Yeah,
people would be
a
there.
couple thousand.
Yeah, so
The
this was,
Boston Computer Society. Maybe you don't even know this. That we used to have like interest groups.
Yeah, SIGs.
The Houston PC group would be 7,000 or 8,000 people would show up for a meeting.
Wow.
Just to talk about how to use computers. And they had them for Apple II, and they had them for PC, and they
so
had them
it
for
was a
CP/M.
phenomenon at
Oh,
that
yeah.
time.
Oh, yeah, totally. So here's the distinction. You'll understand this, Jason, because of the business that you're in. Because I used to do a newsletter and I did a conference analyst. It was an industry. It was a personal computer industry. So it was a self-contained business, and it was brand new. And it didn't work the way the rest of the computer industry worked. So it was a real us versus them kind of thing. So there were
And
young
the
people.
rest of the industry was what at that time?
Like a Digital Equipment Corporation or Data General or IBM or
Like a big-
Hewlett-Packard.
big iron.
Big, yeah. And nobody understood those. Those were in the basement, and you had to have it was the priesthood thing and surrounding them. And
You had to wear a lab coat to use a computer back then.
and in fact, so I worked at Inc. Magazine, and we would write articles about these things, mini computers. And you could buy a mini computer for $25,000, and you could do accounting and general ledger. And we write these articles, and of course we surveyed every issue that we did. And nobody read the articles because they were like deadly boring.
Right.
And it wasn't about doing business. It was about doing some damn thing called computers.
Right.
But then we started writing about personal computers. And they're personal. You could put them on your desktop. You could do a spreadsheet. You could, write some words with, there's been many generations of word processors since then.
Right.
But, and that was personal. And so that was the magic. It was personal, $2,000 or $3,000.
Where did that name come from, do you think? Personal
No,
computer?
it wasn't the first thing. They were called microcomputers originally.
Microcomputers was the first name.
That's what.
Yeah.
So this is how bad it's
Microsoft.
got memory. Well, no, Microsoft originally it kind of was, but the company, the hardware that they put it on was Advanced Microcomputer or something.
Advanced
or other.
microcomputers, right.
Yeah.
So they originally were called microcomputers.
Microcomputers.
Do you know who coined personal computer?
I wouldn't dare to give authorship to anybody, but it became associated very rapidly with Apple.
Yeah.
So
Probably
Commodore's-
Jobs or somebody around
I
there.
don't think he
Came up with it, but
did that, but
so he would come and show the Apple II or some new thing, and it was a religious experience for these people.
Oh yeah, I mean, just same thing. I mean,
Yeah.
what we know about Steve Jobs more recently, before he passed away, same thing. He had the same ability to, modify your reality and to bring you into his force field. Now, he had it, and he's a kid. It was very disappointing. He died because he's 4 years younger than I was at the time, and so the time I'm 25, he's like 21, and he's doing it.
Right, and you're an editor of a magazine covering a 21-year-old Steve Jobs. And so tell me that first moment where you shake hands with him and say, hey, I'm Stewart. And
Well, I was pretty intimidated, I have to admit,
Yeah.
even at that point in time, because the company was successful. It was very small, but it was successful.
they had tens of thousands of computers out at that point, probably.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
I could probably be wildly inaccurate if
Yeah,
I
but it was
rely on
a
memory.
$3,000 or $4,000 computer.
The original Apple II was 1999,
Yeah.
but all you got was the
Yeah.
case.
So you were in for $3,000 or $4,000 if
Yeah,
you got it.
if you want to have the monitor, certainly if you want to have a printer, but that
Yeah.
was a whole other story. But,
Right.
Because there were dot matrix printers.
Oh God, yeah, 8 dots to make a
just like
barely
this.
readable. So Steve Jobs, you meet him, and what's that like? You're intimidated, and
So I was introduced to him by Jonathan Rotenberg, and Jonathan was this kid who started the Boston Computer Society, which became a big organization. Actually, ended up being the editor. I got fired from Inc. during that process, and so I became the editor.
what'd you get fired for?
I've been fired a lot. I have a big mouth. And,
Was it really because you said something that was just too...
yeah.
Really?
Yeah. I mean, it's intense detail about the whole thing, but basically I just...
What did you say? I mean, give me
I told the publisher he'd done the wrong thing.
You told the publisher he's an idiot.
I didn't use the word idiot, but it didn't matter because this is Bernie Goldhirsch, who was like an amazing guy. I said to him, Bernie, when he started Sail Magazine, it was his first magazine, and it was part of the Institute for the Advancement of Sailing, which I always thought was pretty funny. And,
Right.
And I said, so Bernie, you were 28 when you started the magazine, and I'm 28, and I think you should make me editor of the magazine. And he said,
Right.
no, you're too young. And I said, no, you're wrong, because you were 28.
Ah.
And so he didn't make me editor, and then he fired me. But,
Really?
yeah.
Wow.
You know, in this business.
Yeah.
Some
It's probably
people
the
have
best
said
thing.
that you're. Some people have even said that Jason Calacanis is kind of an obnoxious.
Yeah, it has come up from time to time. He's a strong personality.
He speaks his mind. It's
Yeah,
like, you know,
exactly.
It's not a very good way to be employed if you want to speak your mind.
No, it's a great way, though, to be independent. So
Yes.
tell me about that first meeting with Jobs. You interviewed him for that cover story?
No, I just met him on a show actually,
Yeah.
and talked to him a lot. I really didn't have much interaction with him. It was later that I got involved with him, but we published an article and put him on the cover, and he, you know, this has all been reported, but he spent a lot of time worrying about pictures of him and whether they were the right thing. I mean, he had a lot of attention to detail, and so he decided to have a picture made of himself to put on the cover of Ink. And so the first mistake I made was I rejected his picture and I took ours. And
Whoa.
I did it on purpose because he had very long hair at the time, and the photographer had put the wrong filter on the camera, so it had this kind of greenish cast. You can go back and look at it. It's like November of 1980 cover of Ink. And he's sitting there with his hands on the computer looking at you, and he looks evil. I mean, and that's why I chose it, because I put the headline on it, "This man has changed business forever."
Huh.
And yeah, and I doubt you can find it online.
Yeah, it's probably not going to be online, but we'll have our researchers find it.
Yeah, I mean, go find it because it's a fascinating picture. But
We'll find it.
But so he was pissed off at me that I didn't use the photo that he sent, and then we did a profile of him that went along with the article, and in it I mentioned that. You know, his net worth, which, you know, at the time was like $100 million, but he was really worried about, it's pretty interesting, getting close.
Getting close.
You can see that the second one on the second, oh, there it is, the third one over.
This
On
one?
the top, that one, that's the
Oh,
one.
yeah, look at that. He does look evil.
Yeah.
And boy,
This
does he
man has
look
changed
like
business forever.
he looks like Ashton Kutcher in that one for
Yeah,
sure.
I haven't actually watched the movie. Can I admit something?
Yeah.
I know I'm doing it publicly, but
There it is. There is the famous photo. This man had changed business forever.
yeah, and I wanted it to be threatening. I want people to pay attention, because here he is leaning on the Apple II, and he's like, he's got the beard and the hair, and it's got this greenish cast, because it really wasn't a really good picture. So he
Yeah.
was technically right about that.
So he did not like the photo.
He didn't like the photo, and he didn't like the fact that we called him
And what
out.
was his net worth at the time? Oh, here
You
it
know,
is.
It's probably right there.
Yeah.
163 million, yeah.
And at that
163 million.
time, staggering amount of money.
Staggering amount of money.
Right.
7.5 million shares of Apple.
Wow.
So anyway, that was my first. So it was really doing the article that I had
Right.
the first encounter with him, and I've had a bunch since then. And you know, I had this kind of weird relationship with him because it didn't bother me to piss him off. And,
Right.
You know, a lot of people were.
Did he respect you for that you were a straight shooter with him, or did he just find that annoying because everybody else?
He dealt with me in the degree he felt like he had to deal with me.
Really?
I can give you a great anecdote if you want.
All right, when we get back from this commercial break, we're going to get Stewart Alsop's best Steve Jobs anecdote on This Week in Startups. Oh, what a great interview this is. I am so thrilled that we have Stewart Alsop on the program. And, you know, I couldn't do this program if it wasn't for the support of people like Brandis and Gina and Demont and Emily and all the people, the staff. There's a little staff who work on the show. And that's how they get great guests like the one we have today. And, you know, hey, that costs money. And I have to have partners to help me. And I am so blessed to have fans of startups and the startup community as my partners. And they've been multi-year partners. Like, there's a really great way to tell if you got a good partners if they stick around for a couple of years. And Scott Walker of the Walker Corporate Law Group is one of those partners I've had for years. And the Walker Corporate Law Group, you guys know this if you're fans of the show, is a boutique law firm. And they only represent founders and startups. That's what they do. That's Scott's mission. You know how you talk about mission statement? Scott's got a mission. His mission is to help entrepreneurs. And I just got off the phone today with an entrepreneur who's dealing with all kinds of crazy stuff, like literally company formation and legal and IP, intellectual property assignment. It's a very complex issue. And I said, well, you know, have you had any legal help? He goes, yeah, I called Scott. It's a true story. Scott doesn't know I'm telling it. I'm not going to give the details. I said, you called Scott. I was like, oh, that's great. What did he say? He said, oh, he gave this really detailed response, whatever. I was like, oh, that's great. So Scott's workers? No, he didn't, we haven't engaged him yet. He just did it for free. I'm like, what? Of course he did, because Scott Walker cares. That's the story you need to hear to know Scott's character. And you can email him, Scott at Walker Corporate Law, Scott at Walker Corporate Law, or visit walkercorporatelaw.com. His phone number, 415-979-9998, 415-979-9998. You can call him. He may pick up. And he's got all these great people working with him. They're not associates learning in your startup. No, they have 10, 20 years, decades of experience, and they're not getting on-the-job training. And mergers and acquisitions, licensing agreements, terms of service, privacy policy, you know all the good stuff he does. But he encourages fixed fees, and that makes people be at ease with his services. So you don't really have to worry about like, oh my God, I'm going to get this crazy bill. And in fact, in this story, he just helped somebody out because he's a mensch. Thanks, Scott, for supporting This Week in Startups. Let's get back to this amazing interview. Hey, everybody, it's Jason Calacanis, at Jason on Twitter, and I am here with Stewart Alsop, which is S. Alsop on Twitter, S-A-L-S-O-P. Go follow him on Twitter. And we are taking a walk down memory lane to the early days of the PC industry. You're editor of Inc. You cover Steve Jobs. You mentioned his net worth. He doesn't like it. But you have a better Steve Jobs.
Yeah. He called me up and yelled at me, but that was just the first time, and I got yelled at a bunch by him over the next 20-plus years. So I got fired from Inc. I screwed around. I did a magazine in Boston. I moved to California and became editor of InfoWorld. Got fired from InfoWorld and started my newsletter and then my conference business. Very collapsed version of my biography. So I'm doing the conferences. So
known as
Agenda.
Agenda
Right. Was my first conference.
And your newsletter was Agenda.
PC letter. No,
PC letter, right. So at this time, what people don't realize, there were not blogs.
No.
There were newsletters.
There was no network.
There was no network. There's no internet.
No internet.
There was no internet.
I printed these things.
You printed a newsletter and mailed them. And there was PC letter.
Yeah, PC letter, Agenda. I'd start a demo after Agenda.
And then there was Release 1.0. Was Esther?
No, that's Esther's.
That's Esther's. I'm saying, but there was Release 1.0.
Yeah, so Esther had Release 1.0, and she bought Ben Rosen's newsletter, which was called Rosen Electronics Letter. That's why Release was REL. Release 1.0 is this sort of follow-on to Rosen Electronics
And
Letter.
people would pay $1,000 or $2,000 a year for these.
No, not quite that much. It's
$500.
But we escalated the cost of the conferences.
Right.
When I started Agenda, Esther was charging $995 for her conference. So I charged $1,095, and she got pissed off and charged $1,195 for her conference. And then I said, screw it, I'm going to charge $1,300. Eventually, we ended up at $5,000 a head.
Right. And these conferences
now
had
the conferences are
$300.
$6,000-$7,000.
Yeah.
It's like,
but I mean, you guys did create this elite conference experience, which when I came into the industry in the 90s, I was desperate to go to a demo or a PC forum, but I couldn't afford to go. So I had to beg my way and lobby crash.
Yes.
Thus the obnoxious Calacanis kid in the lobby who is
at
blogging.
Jason's in there. Well, you weren't at Jason.
I wasn't at Jason, but I'm blogging from the lobby or writing,
you weren't the only one. So
yeah, lobby crashing was like I found lobby crashing was high art.
So anyway, I started Agenda, and the first few Agendas I had Bill Gates always as the anchor speaker. I'd do a fireside chat. By the way, I was the one that introduced fireside chats to the industry.
Thank
I'd
you.
do a fireside chat with him. And he'd come to the whole conference, and he'd review the conference with me and talk about what the trends were. And it was great. It was like standing room only. Everybody would show up.
And he would hang out, I remember, for the entire event.
The entire event.
And he would talk to anybody. He was not afraid of being...
He was like part of the business.
Yes.
Right? So Steve didn't ever do that.
Right. Parachute in and out.
But we shifted locations. We went from Laguna Niguel to the Phoenician, and we had to shift back a month because it was so hot in Phoenix in September. And by then he already had an appointment with like the Prime Minister of China, so I couldn't get Gates for the last thing. So I went to Steve, and I went to him in Cupertino, and I had an appointment with him, and I said, Steve, I'd like you to close out my conference, and I'd like you to do this fireside chat. The only requirement is you have to be there for the whole conference. And he goes, okay. And I don't want to make him sound eager. He never sounded eager for anything, but
Right.
but he agreed to it. And so I keep checking in with him. Then we get this call from one of his assistants saying, "Is there a local airport that he can fly into?" And ended up he wanted to fly in right before his presentation. And so I told his underling, I said, it's clear that Steve's too busy to do what I asked him to do and to what he agreed to. So just tell him, don't worry about it, don't come. And
Wow.
It was not a ballsy thing to do because I've pissed off Steve Jobs so many times. I'm used to it. But
Why did you?
Within 3 minutes, I got a phone call from him from an airplane.
From an
Flying back
airplane?
From an airplane, screaming at me. "What do you mean you're not inviting me to the conference?" he said. And I said, "Well, Steve, it's clear you're too busy to come to the conference. I came down and visited you and we agreed to come to the whole conference. And I don't hold this conference for you. I hold this conference for my customers. And if you're not going to do what you said, then I can't have you come to the conference."
Wow.
Never. I didn't talk to him for quite a while after that one.
But did he come or not?
No.
He didn't come.
No, I subbed him with John Doerr talking about cable,
Wow.
ubiquitous network, which was a popular session, but not the same as Gates.
So how did, at this time, you, somewhere along the line, Windows just demolishes Apple. What was that like in the industry when Windows just accelerated so far past Apple in the industry? Like, what impact did that have?
I always object to the idea that Windows demolished Apple because what Microsoft created was an ecosystem that grew on its own accord, and it really wasn't about Apple. Apple really screwed itself and really destroyed itself. So, and Scully fired Jobs. The whole story's been well published, right? By the time they were on their fourth CEO after Jobs left, it was clear there was no direction in the company, no sense of product, none of the stuff that people know about Apple now. We all worry maybe Tim Cook and Johnny Ive can't pull off what Steve did. Well, we know to worry about that because there was this period of time where Steve wasn't there and they couldn't do it.
So what do you think happens now to Apple? I mean, it feels like there is a lack of vision at the top. What do you think?
No, I'm trying to be practical about this. Apple's got 3 product lines. Mac, iPhone, iPad. Let's just say they got some other stuff,
Right, but that's
TV. But there's 3 big multi-billion-dollar product lines that produce a lot of business and that make them a valuable company. The thing that Steve did is he added 2 product lines to the first one.
Right.
And Mac is now only like 10 or 15% of Apple's revenue. So he really created a new company out of the iPhone and the iPad. We even forget about the iPod now.
Yeah, the iPod is now a subset of the features.
So the only way that Apple can be more valuable going forward is to create another product. And we all know what it is because Steve said he'd figured it out before he died.
The TV.
The TV. And I actually know what it is.
You do?
Yeah, I'm not under non-disclosure. I know exactly what it is, though, because there's only one product that can be made. And it's so obvious. I don't understand why people get upset about it. Because
it's the TV.
Well, this is a telephone, right?
Right.
And we all know what a telephone was before Apple did it.
Right.
Well, Apple turned the telephone into a computer with
the
TV
TV
phone
will be
as an app.
Right.
So the TV will be a computer with the TV as an app.
Yeah.
It's like, and that puts design constraints on it. The first thing is it has to have a big screen, but then it has to be a computer. It can't start as a receiver, as a television receiver.
Yeah,
This is what Samsung and Sony and LG and all those guys, that's what they'd make. They know how to do that.
Right.
They don't know how to change that because they've got this entire infrastructure embedded around it. So the only company that can figure out how to do that is Apple, and I believe that there's still the resources to do that. And it doesn't really matter whether they did it last year or next year or this year, because it's such a big thing, such a big change, that they don't have to rush into it. In fact, they don't want to rush into it. They want to get it right. And there's some really hairy things to do. Getting a screen like that they can be manufactured, because they have to sell a television for less than $2,000. I mean, probably for less than that. At least smaller ones have to be less than that. And so to do that in mass manufacturing with OLED screens, and it's a tough job. So I think Steve set the spec, and now they're trying to produce that product. And Tim really knows how to do a really high-quality product, and Johnny Ive really knows how to design it to make it look really cool. And so they know how to make the product. They don't have to invent it.
Yeah, but they don't have Steve Jobs to push and prod and be unreasonable.
Well, there's a lot of reports. Tim Cook's, like that. The retail guy, he was out within less than 6 months.
Oh, right. So he has a little of that.
Tim Cook knows how to
be unreasonable.
The thing is a product thing. The story in the Dogfight book about picking the stone for the Chicago Apple Store. I don't know if you read
Yeah, I remember that,
dog
yeah.
fight. So they set up samples of like 3 or 4 samples of the stone in a parking lot, and everybody sits around waiting for Steve to show up, and he shows up, gets out of his car, looks at the stone, and goes, "Get me a fucking bucket of water." Am I allowed to do that? I don't know.
Yeah,
if
you can do
not
that, sure.
Over the year.
Why not?
Get me a goddamn bucket of water. And so people look at each other and go, "Bucket of water." It's like, we're in a parking lot. So somebody scrambles off, they finally come back, and he throws it on the wall and goes, 70% of the time, that's what it's going to look like in Chicago. And they all looked at each other and went, yeah, it rains 70% of the time in Chicago. Why wouldn't you have thought of that?
Yeah.
That's what he did.
Right.
He always thought of the thing other people didn't think about, and that's the pushy part. That's the, to really represent the consumer.
Refinement.
Yeah.
Like, it's like a last little bit
details,
of little
the
polish.
part that really matters. And so that's very hard. Tony Fidel, I think he's got it. He spent 14 years with Steve, so I think he figured it out.
The Nest guy. And Google buying Nest is a huge win for Google and a huge mistake for Tim Cook to let it go.
No, I don't think so.
Okay. Why?
So the latter might be true. It might be that Apple should have bought Nest, but they don't need to buy Nest. Google, the reason that Google paid $3.2 billion. The line is that it's $1 billion for Nest and $2.2 billion for Tony.
So the value of the business.
They needed Tony. And
he's that good.
he's that good. And he's probably the one guy who really absorbed and modified and turned into his own the thing that Steve did. And you can see it in the Nest products. Those are amazing products. I love my thermostat now. I love my smoke detectors. I haven't even installed them yet. I have them stacked up on my front.
But you love them.
But I love them.
Right.
It's like
a smoke detector.
A smoke detector
is your favorite thing.
I'm not saying
It's in your top 10
but
this
I
year.
love it.
Yeah.
But I love it.
You're
I
in
love
love
my
with the
smoke
smoke
detector
detector.
now. But previously, I just thought them as a pain
How do
in
you
the
feel about
ass.
the garbage can in your kitchen?
Well, when Tony Fidel's through it, I'm sure that I'll be really happy about it.
Any love for the toaster?
Actually, I have a, what the hell is it called? I have a French toaster.
Millet?
It's called Magonics, or, oh crap.
But design didn't matter that much in the early days of computing.
But because, okay. So when you talk about design has to be done in the context of being able to understand the materials and the manufacturing process and the whole thing. It's really hard to make products. You may have noticed Kickstarter has gotten all these people to start hardware. That stuff is crap. These guys don't know what they're doing.
Right.
The hardware is crap. The software isn't any good. It's really, really hard to do this.
Right.
And you have to know a lot. And that was the thing Steve always did, was he knew a lot about, wasn't a hardware engineer. He wasn't going to sit there and solder things together, but he understood the technology in depth, so he knew what he could get out of it, and he could push people to get that out of it. Like the original iMac, but you look at the iMac that you have now, it's like this super thin screen that sits on your desk. It's got the whole damn computer in it.
Right.
It's just
Gorgeous.
spread out through the whole thing, and it's like really thin and, with chips and all that stuff that really hard. So when you talk about design 30 years ago, there was you couldn't do anything with it. You could maybe put a plastic case around it. You could choose which colors to put in the plastic case, but now you can make an amazing.
If the Apple TV is a computer, right, and the watching television is an application, what do you think the other leading apps will be? Because he seemed to have figured out, TV watching. Do you think it's going to be that Breaking Bad is an app, and you just buy it as an app?
No, shows aren't apps. Shows are shows. And shows are a
shows.
distinct piece of content which transcend the device that you're watching it on. I mean, to some degree, you just hold up an iPad and get up Netflix and watch a House of Cards.
Yeah.
You're watching a television.
Right.
It's a computer, right?
Yeah.
You're watching a show, but it's got all the functionality around it for doing all the other stuff that you want to do. And people speculate about maybe we want to be social and, share what we think about a TV show. I think a lot of that's bullshit, but because television, it's a really intense experience. It's emotional, and you're engaged with it, and it's that's media consumption. And so, the original idea on interactive television is we would do polls and stuff, and we'd interact with our television. And you go, no, people don't like to. I invested in TiVo. It's one of my better deals. So, TiVo, the key thing they learned is people really like to watch television.
They do.
They like to watch television.
They enjoy TV.
They're not the snobs in Washington, D.C. saying it's a wasteland. They love watching television. So if you make it possible for them to watch more of it, wow, they go to town.
Huge innovation. All right, when we get back from a commercial break, I want to talk to about your 2 decades as a venture capitalist. first I want to hear about the big wins, but after that, immediately after that, I want to hear about the anti-portfolio. Stewart Alsop's biggest misses as well as his biggest wins when we get back from this very important message. I love video. You guys know I love video. And there's a lot of video platforms out there. Some of them are free, some of them are paid. When you grow up and you need to control your video, right? Like our show was free, it's on YouTube and other places. But then we grew up and we needed a lot more features. Like we wanted to have more control on our website of how our content was presented. You're not gonna get that with a lot of free platforms, but there is a platform called Wistia. Wistia, W-I-S-T-I-A, and it is awesome. Who uses it besides us? MailChimp, Moz, Blank Label, 50,000 customers are using it, and I asked on my Twitter account months ago, I was like, I wonder if there's an option for me where I can control my video a little bit more and put up like a little roadblock that says, hey, if you want to join our mailing list, put your email address in here before you actually watch This Week in Startups. Some of you will see that when you go to thisweekinstartups.com. And I literally got dozens and dozens of people on my Twitter account. Wistia, Wistia, Wistia. Oh, you got to try Wistia. Wistia is the gold standard. Wistia is the gold standard. Anyway, it is the gold standard, and video hosting is super important. And I got to tell you, every week we get another 50, another 100, another 25 emails. And we've only just started using this. If I had been doing that for the last 4 years, I'd have another 10,000, 20,000 emails on my list. All those kind of great features are available at Wistia. Go to wistia.com/twist. Wistia, W-I-S-T-I-A. .com/twist. And TWiST stands for This Week in Startups. And no credit card required. Your first 5 videos are free. It kind of runs like MailChimp. Like how I'm so dependent on MailChimp. That's how I am now at Wistia. I just love this product. It works. And it looks gorgeous. Like when you put some of those other players on, you got to deal with all the detritus and garbage they put around it. No, not with Wistia. Clean, simple, easy to use, and the metrics, the analytics, I can't even tell you how addicted I am to the analytics on Wistia. Look at this. Here I see the daily trends for all my videos, how many people are watching, what percentage they watched, how many hours they watched, total plays, and we're just getting started on this. And I'm like, my God, the engagement on these videos, listen, it is me in the video, so granted the engagement is going to be high. But the fact is now I know the engagement because Wistia has all these great I'm laughing at myself, yes, while my 2 producers are laughing at me. Listen, Wistia. Everybody thank at Wistia on their Twitter handle. And this interview with Stewart Alsop is amazing, if I do say so myself. What a legend to have on the program. What a privilege, and what a privilege it is to have Wistia as a partner. Let's get back to the program. All right, hey, you're listening to This Week in Startups. I'm your host, Jason Calacanis, at Jason on Twitter, and I'm with Stewart Alsop, who is a legend in the technology industry. One of the, when I was coming up and was, a 20-year-old brat, I would try to crash his conference and beg him to get 5 minutes for a cup of coffee with me, and Esther Dyson and all these other great folks.
And now I just adore at Jason, so roles are reversed.
Well, it's interesting how that happens. I basically, in all truth, I studied your playbook. I studied Esther Dyson's playbook as a youngin', and I photocopied it. And that's why it's such a big thrill for me to have you on the program, because the demo conference, you having people demo live on stage and launch, it's the same conference. It just has a little slightly different spin on it. Me doing
Your former partner made some rude remarks about that.
Yes. Well, with the $20,000 fee, it got a little out of control. Well, you had an innovation in the beginning of the demo conference, which was it was $1,000 to present or something. But that
actually, I can explain it to you if you want.
Explain it, because it was to pay for the space, right?
So we started Agenda, and Agenda was for the big monkey mucks in the business, executives, and it was exclusive. You had to be invited to go, and there were only 400 people could go, and you paid a lot of money. $5,000 ticket. And so the whole thing was intended to create an environment where you felt like you were really special. Right. But in that special environment, I'd wander around in the hallways while the program's going on, and there are people demonstrating their products sitting around in the hallways. Yeah. And I'm going, that's more fun. People have more fun doing that than they do listening to these goddamn speeches. Yeah. And so I split off into the conference, and I called it Demo. And the idea was to get your product in front of people. Right. So the $20,000 fee was charged to the people demonstrating their products, not to the people attending the conference. And so we switched the economics so that if you wanted to introduce your product, now you have to remember we started Demo before there was a network. Right. So there was no internet. And it was a really big issue when the internet started to happen and Demo was being produced, because it's like, well, crap, now people can just go online and get demos. Are they still going to want to come to our conference? Yeah. And they did, because there's a kind of social component to it of being in an environment where you're talking to people. But So people were perfectly happy. You talk to the people, and you've had a bunch
Yeah.
of successes out of launch, right, where you've launched products, and you mentioned them earlier. Well, we did too, like Palm. Palm's sitting there going, 20 grand?
remember.
My God, the company was worth like $1 billion at one
Yeah,
point. It's
will
like,
do, yeah.
you know, so the $20,000 is like a small price to pay
Right,
if you're going to successfully introduce your product.
But now we have a different stage. I mean, venture capital used to be.
Well, you revised the stage. That was cool. You came along and said you rethought the problem and did it differently. That's
Right.
cool.
Yeah.
I just didn't appreciate Mr. Arrington taking a shot at
Well, he's good.
my
He's
pricing scheme.
He's prone to do that, and literally a lot of I credit a lot of my success to what you guys did in copying you and Esther and a lot of that stuff. So I do appreciate it. But let's talk about your venture capital work. You decided to get out of the conference business and focus on venture capital. Why did you make that?
I actually got out of the conference business when I became editor of InfoWorld again.
Again,
So I got
second time
fired in
around.
1984, and then I went back in 1991 and became editor again for 5 years. And that was really to prove that I could actually run the place. I still felt a little stung about being fired.
Right.
So I ran it for 5 years.
Do you
and it
enjoy
was-
being an editor of a magazine?
I did at the time. Just
What
like
was-
I enjoyed being a writer or just
Right.
being a conference producer. That's all,
What do you find enjoyable about it? Obviously, we're kindred spirits in this regard, but what do you like about writing?
Well, now, editing and writing are two different things.
Sure.
Editing and putting a package together, being an editorial manager or whatever you want to call it, creating a product is amazing. And it's kind of lost now, so I don't really know how to talk about it in current terms. But at the time, you'd assemble this massive number of details into a package. And if you were really good, you'd get people to read the package,
Right.
and the package would be successful. And they'd get engaged with it. And over time, you'd habituate them to the package. And you get them, draw them into your environment. And that's just like amazing. So it's like being a conductor where you're bringing all these elements together to create something of value.
And when you're talking about a physical magazine,
Yeah,
a product,
this is why I say it's all
yeah,
changed
it's
now,
hard
'cause-
people to understand now because it's just hitting the publish key and tweeting something now.
And the models for what you do to aggregate an audience now are much different. The
Yeah.
whole way you acquire customers and retain them, and it's a different interaction. And the print part, persists. There's still people that do it, but it's just a subset of what it used to be. So that and then I stopped doing that, and I became a venture capitalist. Then I started writing for Fortune, so I was strictly a writer for 7
Right.
years. And
Do you enjoy that?
oh yeah,
Just writing a
I did.
lot.
I have to have a deadline. I have to have an editor.
Yeah.
I can't do it voluntarily.
What do you like about writing?
I've done this too much during my life, but Mark Twain once said that I hate writing, but I love having written. I love the reaction. I love the reaction. If I can really nail it and people read what I wrote and then they give feedback, and I mean, in the current environment, it's pretty amazing what you can get out of it. But, I figure I'm on, it's not a treadmill, but I'm in a race to try to figure stuff out faster than other people.
Right.
And if I can do that and beat them to it and then tell them about it, and they realize that I figured it out first, maybe it's like a perversion or something.
It's like a chess match. It's like a global chess match going on, or a poker game where
So
something.
here's a Bill Gates anecdote.
Yeah.
So in my heyday, when I was writing my newsletter, I would get to have dinner with Bill Gates every 6 months. And
Wow.
it happened over a period of 4 or 5 years. And I realized that by the second dinner, didn't take me long, that the way I got to have dinner with Gates, I wouldn't have the invitation extended again if I didn't, was to say something to him during dinner that he hadn't thought of.
Wow.
So it was a lot of pressure because Bill Gates is like a really, really smart guy, and he was running the company and knew everything about the
Is he
business.
the smartest guy you ever met?
Oh, no.
Who is?
When you say smart, Steve Jurvetson might be the smartest guy I've ever met.
Really?
He's
Wow, that's
just
interesting. He
brain
was
smart.
so great on the show.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But his brain, he's funny and all that kind of stuff, but he's just brain smart. He knows about
Yeah.
stuff. And Mark Andreessen is incredibly smart.
Yeah, and both of those individuals very witty too.
Yeah.
So anyway, back to Gates dinner.
So Gates is smart in a way that surprises most people. He's an incredible businessman. It wasn't just that he knew how to code or that he was technically competent. He is an incredible businessman. Shrewd, cunning, cutthroat, driven.
What's the most cunning or cutthroat anecdote that you know of about Bill Gates that represents this like win at all costs approach that he had during that period?
I can only speak from hindsight because I
Yeah.
didn't know it at the time. But
Right.
but when I learned what Microsoft did to its hardware customers, cut them off if they didn't do what they wanted.
Really?
Yeah.
Explain that.
Sorry, don't get Windows anymore.
Really?
Yeah.
So wait, how would that work in practice?
Well, let's see what I can talk about. I don't think I'm going to violate any particular things. I was on the board of BOS. Remember B?
Yeah, B was an operating system to compete with Windows.
Or any other operating system. But it was an operating system, and it was built from the ground up to be kind of multimedia, real-time operating system, all the kind of things we associate it with devices now.
It was incredibly far ahead. And this is in the early 90s, if I'm correct. Late 80s, early 90s?
So no, even later than that, because I joined NEA in 96, and I was on the board in 97, 98. The company went public in 99, so.
Oh, yeah.
And it did go public. Most people forget that. BOS is one of the wins in my portfolio.
Yeah.
I actually inherited it from another partner, but it went public while I was on the board.
Yeah.
So at the time, the company was going public, but it also wanted to sue Microsoft for anti-competitive behavior. Right. And I said, look, you can go public, and I'll get off the board, and then you can sue them, because I don't want to be associated with a company suing Microsoft. You know, I don't believe that's the right way to do things.
Why not? You want to win in the market?
Yeah, I like to win by product and in the market, not through the courts, and just not my style or approach. And so, and they did actually. So I did leave the board, and they did sue.
Wow.
If you go read the court documents on that, you'll find out exactly what Microsoft said to some of its OEM partners.
And what was that?
Like,
paraphrase.
if you license software from BOS, we'll stop supplying Windows.
Wow.
You won't be able to ship Windows on your computer.
So you're Dell, and you want to try another OS.
I didn't mention that particular company.
I pulled one out of the air.
Yeah.
Which happened to be the biggest at that time.
At the time.
Michael Dell, you will not have Windows.
Yeah. We'll
You're
stop
dead
shipping
to us.
Windows to you. Or, you know, maybe it's like, oh, you'll get the version after everybody else.
Oh, so everybody else gets 3.1, you get 3.0, you
3.0.
suffer for a little bit. We'll see how your sales go.
See how your sales go. Just, it was really, I mean, it was hardcore. And, you know, they were all powerful. All powerful.
Yeah.
So when you hear people talk about Google now, you do have to pay attention to that, because power does corrupt. I mean, when you're sitting on top of, I don't know. So Google bought Nest for $3.2 billion, and everybody goes gaga over the $3.2 billion.
Yeah, but
it's 5% of their cash and less than 1% of their market cap. But they write a $3 billion check. It's like, well, whatever.
Who cares?
Yeah. It's not that who cares, because it does put a value on the company, but, you know, they really wanted Tony Fadell.
Right.
So, but they only paid 1% of the company for it.
Right, and if he can have more than a 1% impact, or if they have a machine that prints billions of dollars a quarter.
Now here, I'll give you I think this is the Larry Page calculation. He needs Tony Fadell, because Tony Fadell is a product guy. He knows how to make products. You may have noticed that Google's been making products, and forget about Motorola. That was just a mistake.
Right.
But the Nexus products, the Q, the glass,
Chromecast, glass.
all of the stuff that they're doing, they're all over the map. They've got some people that are good at products, some are not.
Yeah.
Larry Page doesn't really know how to manage a product. Tony Fadell knows how to do that.
Right.
If he comes in and he trains the executive staff and Larry Page himself to think about this correctly, and they end up with a $100 billion hardware business or a $40 billion hardware business. I mean, who gives a shit what they paid for Nest?
Yeah.
It's like
they got off easy.
You know, and that's where I'm pretty sure. I've never met Larry Page, so I don't know anything about him, but I'm pretty sure that's kind of where he operates.
Easy calculation.
Yeah, I mean, he's the thing that Larry Page did since he took over as CEO is he said, stop doing all that stupid stuff. No more buying little companies. Don't stop doing all these little projects. Let's just do the big things.
Go big.
Self-driven cars, satellite networks, I mean, balloon networks, and, you know, all this stuff. He's working on the big stuff. It's like, and as a result, the company's become incredibly powerful.
How would you, when you look at Larry Page's approach to going big, in your 40 years in the biz, have you ever seen anything like that?
I'd say 34.
35 years in the biz. Have you 35.4? Going on, 30 plus years in the business. Have you ever seen anything like Larry Page's ambition as shown in the past year or two?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Who has ever had that diverse of a
Bezos.
Okay. Sure.
I mean, look at this guy. So there are certain things I learned as a younger person, principles that I operate by that I believe. Like, companies have a hard time doing more than one thing at a time. If they do more than one thing, usually the things have to be related to each other. So there's some benefit to being in both things. Goddamn Bezos starts a retailer online, then he starts Amazon Web Services.
A cloud computing platform.
Cloud computing platform. Then he starts a hardware product.
Kindle.
Yeah. And he's going to space and buys the Washington Post, and he buys Tony Hsieh's company and lets him do whatever the hell he wants to do. I mean, the guy has got incredible range. I mean,
What makes him able to do that where other people fail, do you think?
That'll be a question for the ages. I know him a little bit, and I spent some time with him, and I like him immensely. He's got a great sense of humor and with his horse laugh and everything, but I haven't spent enough time to answer that question yet.
Why did Bill Gates stop working?
Okay, here's another anecdote. So Bill Gates' going away party for Microsoft, they asked me to do a video for his going away. But they didn't invite me to the party, but they asked me to do a video. And so I happened to be in Seattle, so I went in the Microsoft studios to film it. And my video is very short, and it's basically this. It's like, so Bill, I've known you since we both got started in the business. You're the guy that said, you only had one job in this life, and that's to run Microsoft. And goddamn, look at you. Now you're off saving the world for disease and education, and you just abandoned Microsoft. Whatever happened? Why did he stop? I always thought he'd come back because Ballmer's really screwed up the company now. Why didn't Bill step back in?
How is he screwed up the company, and why what chance is there of Bill Gates coming back?
None. Zero.
So
Zero.
why?
But he's choosing the next CEO, which is what's slowing down the process.
So,
He's chairman of the board, and it might be that John Thompson says he's in charge of the search, but that search doesn't get complete until Bill Gates approves the replacement. He's chairman of the board. He should resign the board or become CEO himself.
That's it.
That's all I'm saying.
Either take over.
Yeah, either do
be
it.
a man.
Or walk away and
walk
let somebody
away.
else decide. Because
But none of this
what's happened
pregnant.
Yeah, none of this half pregnant. And the problem with Ballmer is he's not a product guy.
He's a sales guy. He's a motivational guy.
Yeah,
he's a driver.
Maybe. Yeah, I mean, he was great as Bill Gates' sales guy.
Right.
But he can't run the company because he can't recognize a good product. He doesn't know the difference between one and the other.
Not a product guy.
I mean, I use Outlook. I use Exchange. We use Exchange, and I'm just permanently pissed off that I chose, because I'm an email administrator, so it's my fault. But Exchange is a horrible product. We're talking about email in 2014, and they still call it an out-of-office notice.
Right.
Does that mean that you can only read your email in the office?
Yeah.
At Microsoft? Is
it's
that what it is?
It's a little touches. I mean, to talk about finishing touches that Steve Jobs would do with the marble and throwing a bucket, and here's somebody who is just not really a product guy. But you can't blame him. It's not. He was put in charge.
He's not a product guy. And
He's
done the best job. Hey, he didn't do a terrible job because
the
the
stock
company
went
did
sideways,
greater.
but it made a lot more money.
Yeah.
It
It's a very profitable company, extremely well run, but it doesn't have.
Why do you think Gates will not? Why do you think Gates stopped running the business? Like on a very interpersonal relationship, you knew the man, you know the man, you went to dinner with him twice a year. What made him decide to stop being a competitor? Was he tired of getting his ass kicked from the? Was it the being so hated by the world in the antitrust thing, where people just thought he was this Machiavellian crazy guy?
I don't think he's that hated. First of all,
no, I don't think he was. But people did make him out to be an evil guy during the antitrust thing.
I testified in front of Congress on the antitrust thing.
You did?
I sat behind the green felt table, and I had Bill Gates, Scott McNealy,
son,
Doug Burgum.
Yeah, Doug's from where?
Doug Burgum was Great Plains Software, which Microsoft bought later on. Michael Dell and me.
Wow.
So it was like billionaire, and me.
Journalist. Investor.
Yeah, that was kind of a kick.
Yeah.
I had my mother and my then wife sitting behind me.
And they asked you to comment?
They just wanted me to have an independent opinion on,
And what was it?
What was the truth? I said, functionally what I said was, don't talk to the software competitors. They're all going to complain, of course, because Microsoft is a massively successful software company, and they're very good at what they do. Talk to the hardware guys. Talk to the guys that they sell their product to, and see if you can get them to tell you what it's like buying software from Microsoft. And I did it with Michael Dell and Scott McNealy. Scott McNealy's going, yes! And Michael Dell's sitting there going,
oh boy, no comment.
Yeah, no comment. Because it was in their OEM agreements that they maintain control over the industry.
What about Gates? Why did he quit? It's very weird that a person on the top of their game with the biggest company in the world who loves technology, loves technological challenges, decides he wants to go
save the world.
Save the world. And so is that
he's got
guilt?
$40 billion and Warren gave him the other $40 billion. So
is it more challenging than running Microsoft? Is that what happened?
Yeah, I think so. I think he is an incredible intellect. Bill does.
Clearly.
He's completely rational.
Right.
He doesn't get into the finer things. He's completely rational. And so that's why I don't think he views it as, he would say things like, well, what, you want me to be nice to my competitors? You want me to just give up and let them roll over me?
Right.
It's a competitive world. I compete here.
Right.
It made perfect sense to him to be as competitive as possible.
Right.
There's no, requirement for,
But these were kids and you were a kid when this industry was coming up. People grew up too, right? I mean,
yeah.
who they were in the 80s is like talking about who Mark Zuckerberg was when he was 19 or 20, right?
Well,
Like,
we'll be having that conversation if I survive long enough in another 20 years. But,
well, now Zuckerberg is
26?
something 28 maybe, I don't know. But he too went through a sort of like rough, immature kind of patch.
He hasn't been through anything yet.
Hasn't been through anything yet.
Yeah.
The worst is yet to come.
No, I think Zuckerberg is one of the all-time great entrepreneurs in
You
our
do?
business. Yeah. I mean, the fact that he went and chose Sheryl Sandberg, and maybe, maybe somebody else told him to do that, but he heard it and listened and did it and optimized for it, got the right lady to do it, to run the
Right.
company for him, and that they've carved the roles up, and then he's listened to her about product management. And Facebook is a really well-run company now. 3 years ago, it was a really crappy company. I mean,
Right.
they pissed everybody off every time they did a new release. It was constantly in turmoil. It wasn't that great. Now people consider it a best-in-class place to work, and so it's been transformative. Twitter is a really great example because they didn't have a Zuckerberg, and you're going to have to give Dick Costolo, incredible credit for what he's done, which is to take a complete mess, turn it into a professional company.
There is two different like phases of these companies, right? Like there's the, hey, we just produced something and threw it out in the world, but obviously it's a mess. And then there's this, hey, can we professionalize it?
Well, there's companies that are started by an individual. I've never shared it publicly because it doesn't qualify for FCC distribution, but I have the Silicon Valley asshole theory, which I've been promoting for 25 years. And it really is about how great companies get started, which is it. So originally what I did was I said to myself, well, so there's this pattern I see, and that's all I do is recognize patterns. And I said, there's certain people that start companies de novo. They're like a kid, blue jeans and messy hair, and they start a company, and they end up as CEO of that company when it's got $1 billion of revenue or more. And there aren't very many people that make it that far. And those kind of people, what makes them all the same? And I wrote this in my newsletter, but and I concluded they're all assholes. You go Steve Jobs, Larry Ellison, I forget now, Michael Dell. You line them up. The guys that did that back in the beginning, I did come up with it 25 years ago. They're all assholes, and I'm not saying they're all jerks. Larry Ellison is often referred to as a jerk, but I mean asshole in the sense that they're so driven to accomplish what they want that they will step on other people to make it happen because they consider it a higher order purpose to get the company going. And so Zuckerberg and Bezos, and these are people that are in the same camp. So that's my Silicon Valley asshole theory.
Yeah. It seems like it's this new generation, maybe not as cutthroat. What do you think more?
Well, okay, here's the transformative thing now.
Yeah.
I can't go back to what I used to do.
Right.
You're doing the internet.
Right.
I didn't do the internet.
Right.
I think I've got a pretty good handle on the internet, but I'm not the guy that's going to... that's because it used to be an industry. I said this earlier, right?
Right.
The
PC was an
personal
industry.
computer was an industry, right? It was self-referential. The software ran on the computers. There were APIs. Everybody dealt with each other. So when I held agenda, I could go get the 400 most important people together. You can't do that anymore because now technology is embedded in everything.
Right.
So I talk to people about how education works. And it's clear that education's not going to be like it has been. You can't totally draw the path to what it will be, but you know that it will be different because right now the system doesn't teach people what they need to know to live in this world. Our government's going to change. The way companies are run, everything is changing. So it's no longer an industry. It's in everything. It's an embedded part of our whole life. And that really is the transformative part. The arrival of the internet and the dispersion of computer technologies across the world, into our pockets and, with wireless networks and all of the stuff that's happened has really changed the nature of the industry. We're no longer an industry.
Right. It's just the world.
Yeah, it's a movement.
What's the biggest return you've had on an investment? What's the most successful on a return basis? And what's the most successful on a satisfaction that the product exists in the world? Right?
TiVo far and away. And
okay, on both?
It didn't return the biggest gross number of dollars, and you've never heard of the company that did because it got sold to a company
Which one was
in the bubble. Well, it was originally called Connectify.
Huh, you're right, I have not heard of it.
I know you wouldn't have heard of
Yeah.
this. It's my dream of doing one-to-one marketing through email. And in 1998, which didn't really work very well. We sold it to a company called Kana 3 weeks before it went public. We got 17% of Kana, and Kana ended up being worth $10 billion as a public company.
And you
So
weren't
my
locked
little
up?
17, yeah, and we were locked up. We were locked up really hard for a year, so it went all the way up. Our stake was worth $1 billion, and all the way back down, and we distributed for less than $100 million. But
Still a great return.
great return on a $1.7 million investment. So, but TiVo is the most satisfying because it's had clearly the biggest impact. Now, there are two companies that I've been involved with which I consider iconic for me, and one is TiVo and the other is Sonos. And in Sonos, I was not an investor. I was an independent board member, and so I was on the board for 8 years. And
I love Sonos.
Sonos is an amazing product. TiVo is an amazing product. I love companies where, if you're on an airplane and you sit down and you go, well, I was involved in Sonos. And they grab you by the arm
Oh
and they
my
go,
God.
oh my God, Sonos, that's had a transformative effect on my life. And I'm going, unless they're an attractive lady, I'm
Yeah.
a little scared. But that reaction, that sort of gut reaction that people have when you have a transformative product, I mean, people get it when they have the iPad. And,
Or the Tesla.
The Tesla.
So
I just got a new car, and I regret not looking.
You
at
didn't
the
get a Tesla?
I didn't get a Tesla.
Stewart Alsop
I'm not
doesn't
that cool,
drive a
man.
Tesla?
I'm old.
What did you get?
I
Some
got a
Benz?
BMW X1.
A BMW X1.
Yeah, I used to have a Subaru WRX STI.
Just
That
sell
was
it to an Uber driver and get yourself a Tesla. You got to get out of a BMW. Stewart Alsop doesn't drive.
Yeah, I know.
So what did you miss? Did you miss Google? Did you miss Facebook? Did you miss Twitter?
The
Let's do the
I missed
anti-portfolio.
everything, for Christ's sake. Man.
No,
I could have,
but
I could have invested.
The
in
definition of anti-portfolio is you met with them and had the opportunity to invest, and you passed. Not that you just theoretically passed.
I'm so glad I never met with Google. I talked to a VC.
I heard that, what was the firm? Moore Davidow, I think it was.
I'm not going to mention because I know
Moore
who it is.
Davidow, I think, was met with them. I heard the story, and there was there was one partner who just, wailed against, literally the founders, was not like a Larry Sergey fan.
So I talked to one guy.
Billions.
I talked to one guy who said, so I won't mention the firm or anything like that, but he said the managing partner had agreed to have a meeting with these guys on Friday afternoon, and he wanted to leave to go to Tahoe, so he turned it over to this other partner.
Wow.
And this other partner goes into the meeting, and there's Larry and Sergey, and they're not wearing any shoes. They're dressed very informally. And he walks in and he goes, so, what's going on? And they go, whatever. So he's in this meeting, no background at all. Doesn't know who Larry and Sergey are. And he goes, do you have a presentation? They go, no. We're Google. And he goes, and he told me, he was fairly drunk by the time he told me this, because you shouldn't admit things like this to people, but he said, he got out of that meeting as fast as he could because he thought these guys were complete numbnuts.
Unbelievable. So that mistake, if that was the $100 million round, put $10 million on 10%, it's a $30 billion mistake.
Easily.
Easily 30.
Hindsight is perfect, so you never really know, because there's some really promising companies that don't work out too, and it's part and parcel. So I can't say that Juniper Networks, one of the partners of NEA, and I met with them. No, we did do Juniper. It was another one like that, but that was back in the day.
Like a Palo Alto network, some big.
Covad. I passed on Covad. That was Warburg Pincus made $5 billion off that. So I passed on plenty of deals that I'm not proud about, but the one that I really regret, and I'm telling a story on myself by doing this, is Twitter, because we can read the book and everything, and boy, it's amazing what Twitter's worth today. But I started using Twitter, and I wasn't early. I was 17,000, user number 17,000 or something. But I started using it, and the media thing just kicked in. It was 140 characters, really cool. There's something going on here. And so I started messing with it, and I started thinking about it, and I sent an email to Ev Williams, and I said, and I never met him. I just figured out what his email was, and I sent him an email, and said, hey, if you need any money, I know you're trying to spin it out of Odeo, but if you need any money, I'm happy to help you work it out. And 3 weeks later, he sends me a reply saying, no, don't really need it. Well, in that 3-week period, I don't know this for sure, but in that 3-week period, Fred Wilson flies out from New York, camps on Ev Williams' doorstep, and makes damn sure he gets the deal. And I sit there and I go, crap, I coulda, woulda. So I didn't have an opportunity, I never saw the presentation. And they did do presentations. If you read the book, it
Yeah.
turns out they did pitch some VCs. But
What do you, who do you think?
I should have had that
You
deal.
should have had that one. And you loved it, too.
I know. I've been on Twitter ever
Yeah,
since. It's
you
like,
love
well, that's why I don't write anymore. I don't need to write. 140 characters, you can say a lot in 140 characters.
Right. I think the world misses the newsletter, though. So who was the entrepreneur that failed that, you know, should have been much bigger? You know, like, who is a Bill Gates or a Larry Page or an Elon Musk who didn't make it, but you thought, God, that person had, or that company or that person had so much potential?
I've never seen that happen.
Really? You just know, like, hey, the person.
If they're going to be successful like that, they're going to be successful like
Yeah.
that. I mean,
Eagle
you know,
computer.
ego can get in the way.
Ah.
And I do have way too many stories.
Give me one.
John Doerr designed a laptop one time. Started a company, designed a laptop for the company, and the company utterly failed. And and I appreciate the fact that John Doerr actually wanted to design a computer and wanted to get that involved, but he was like a venture capitalist and he couldn't put all of himself into it. And there wasn't anybody else in the company. So I've seen plenty of people fail, but I don't think there's anybody that has failed that should have been. I think I'm a real believer in natural selection.
What company? Like, is there a company that you just wish still was around, like from?
Yeah, I'm sitting here this is memory problems.
Yeah.
Crap, it's long enough ago that I may not be able to remember.
Like Palm, obviously, you got flipped.
Palm, actually, there's a great example. Palm is a company that just could not get its act together. And they did launch at Agenda, so I feel some authorship there, and it was a great thing. And Donna Dominski gave a speech later on at Agenda called Size Matters. It was a great speech for a lady to be giving because, you know, guys are always talking about how big their thing is. And she was totally right, size matters. When you're moving a computer into your pocket, size matters. It has to be, you know, a certain size. And she rolled out that whole thesis. But they also introduced Palm at Agenda a number of years earlier. And, you know, the fact that they couldn't get it funded and that USR bought it, and then USR was bought by 3Com, and then 3Com jerked it around, and then they went public. I mean, it's just that whole history of Palm is like that company just never got a break and never had a personality who could turn it into a real company.
When you look at where we are now, just on a society basis, you know, and having been that 26-year-old editor writing that story about Steve Jobs, how does the world that you envision today compare to the world we actually have?
God, I don't even know how to answer that. I mean, I used an IBM Selectric phone. I had a typewriter. I had a phone that I had to dial with my finger.
But you looked into the future. That was your job, is to look into the future.
Yeah, I never saw this far. I kind of never saw this far. I got to tell you.
You couldn't see this.
Incrementally, at each stage, I could see the next part, but I couldn't go all the way. I mean, people say that the best way to forecast the future is to read science fiction. And, you know, it's all there. All there.
Yeah.
You know, you just kind of think about what things are going to be like when you like the Blade Runner scene.
Yeah.
Where he's trying to find the fish scale. He ultimately finds the fish scale, but he's looking at his television. He goes, zoom in, nope, to the right, left, goes in. He's looking in the mirror, and he sees the fish scale, and so he picks a picture of it out and takes it out. I mean, that was awesome because that was in, 1982? You know? We don't really have that yet.
Yeah, that was a computer understanding his commands.
Voice recognition. With enough processing power to be able to zoom in at any resolution. Yeah. You know, and then to do the search. So the camera
had a certain
resolution. And then to bring it back. It's like, you know, there's a lot of it.
Getting close.
It's getting close, but it's still not really right there.
Wow. 30 years ago, yeah.
And there's another movie that, anyway, I'm beginning to lose it here. Plus I have to go because
it's time. Listen, Stewart Alsop, legend in the industry. Follow him on Twitter, Alsop, SALSOP. Mentor, inspiration to me for, you know, my 20-year career. Watching him, you know, getting started 15 years before me, and just hearing you talk is like, it's like you say things about writing and about producing the conferences that crystallize in some ways like why I do it. So it's just a real treat to get to spend.
Well, I got to tell you, Jason, I said this, that your launch festivals, I think, are state of the art. and that launched mobile and wearables. I don't know exactly what you called it, but
Yeah, mobile wearables, you got
then
it.
you had the Twitter stream going next to the guy's name while
Yeah.
you're talking to him. You just did an incredible job of integrating the media there, and I'd never seen
Thank you.
that before.
Yeah,
Just,
it's a team effort. We have a really
yeah.
great team here, 9 people working on it. All right, listen, Stewart's got to go and get on with his life, but this has been a real treat. And thank you to our sponsors. Thank you to WeWork Golden Gate. Thank you to Demont, Emily, Gina, Brandis, Simon, Luke, the whole team. I think Katie's a new member of the team at launch. And we'll see you all next time on This Week in Startups. Make sure you check out at Inside and inside.com. We'll see you next time on This Week in Startups. Bye-bye.